hand over to our speakers. I'm just going to do a bit of an update on what the Chamber's been doing. Alison would normally join us on these sessions, but she's having a well-deserved holiday this week. So it's down to myself, Donna and Vince from the Chamber team who are supporting on the session. So the Chamber, many of you may already be aware, but the Chamber have been dealing with the Kickstart scheme. We've already submitted around about 100 jobs for young people throughout the region. So many more positions that we're uploading as the weeks go by. If anybody on the call does want to be part of that Kickstart or find out more about it, then Donna, who's joined us, will be able to give you more information. And I'll be able to share email addresses and such like tomorrow with people to contact Donna. We're also going to be launching shortly some kind of buy local campaigns, one in particular for Dundee and one for Angus. So that's to support retail, hospitality, tourism over the coming months and into 2021. And just really kind of driving forward that buy local message and support local as well. So keep an eye out for those coming through. Tonight's session, we're joined by Graham Millar from Gilson Gray and Alistair Booth from the HR booth. And we're going to be discussing, well, hopefully getting people prepared for Brexit with a view to kind of recruiting and employing overseas. We've got another 2 sessions coming up next week. We're looking at e-commerce, and the week after we're looking at IP, intellectual property. So if you've not already got yourself signed up for those, then head onto the website and get yourself signed up. Tonight's session is sponsored by PHX Water. Unfortunately, Connor can't be with us this evening, but I'll just give you a little bit of information about PHX Water. So they're a Perth-based company who provide Legionella control and private water supply services throughout Scotland. These services include Legionella risk assessment, schematics, water tank cleaning, water treatment systems, plumbing, remedial work, sampling testing, and much more. They're currently working with quite a few Chamber members who include Hotel Indigo, Staybridge, Sleepers, Montrose Port Authority and Craigie Hotel. They're a small organisation, but they have a very experienced team. And they're currently offering a 10% discount on all their services to the Chamber members when they quote DAC 10. So I'll pop that, a link to PHX Water and the code to quote. If you want to get in touch with Connor or the team, then please feel free to do so. That's all for me just now. I'm going to hand over to Graham, who's our first speaker. I shall share my screen for you, Graham.
Perfect.
Have you got that control now, Graham?
I don't think so. I think I'm stuck in this one. The wee icons at the bottom.
You've not got the icons at the bottom now, do you?
No.
No. We did go through this in practice and it all worked. And of course, now we're doing it for real. It's not. Graham, I'll just move the slides on for you.
Perfect. Don't worry, folks. We've been well warned, both Alistair and I, that Bake Off is on this evening. So that's going to cut short any kind of discussions we're going to have. I think when Alistair and I and Sarah first discussed this, I think it was a welcome relief to not mention the word coronavirus in a discussion. But I do cast my mind back to earlier this year, and it seemed to be that's what Brexit was for everyone. It was one of these words that as soon as somebody mentioned it, there was a kind of real disinterest, panic, boredom, rage. So it's good that we're now kind of again talking about something other than coronavirus. And I think the intention tonight is for me to give you a background in terms of where we are legally, and then Alice will give you a bit more detail in terms of the freedom of movement and the new immigration rules for those of you who may well have EU nationals working for you. So if we move on to the first slide. The next, there we are. So the key dates for us, if you move on to the next slide, because I put them down there. Yeah, so exit day was a lifetime ago. That was January of this year. And in effect, we had an 11-month period of time in which to get our house in order. Unfortunately, coronavirus came along and there's been a dearth of any real movement in terms of assistance, guidance for anyone. And, you know, it's even still fairly recently that they started their ad campaigns trying to get us ready for the 31st of December. I mean, it all feels ridiculously short and completely unprepared. But that's what a global pandemic tends to do to these kind of things. So the whole point of the transition period has probably been lost because of coronavirus. But that's not going to change or get extended in any way. That's what's been agreed with all member states. So we move on to the next one. So just so you're aware then of the sort of legal basis of where we're coming from, back in 2018, once we had the agreement and we triggered Article 50 and it was all official, this European Union Withdrawal Act came into being. And in effect, all that was saying to Europe was, stuff you, we're going back to British rule. In effect, all it did was we signed up to the European Communities Act in 1972. And effectively what that said is that much as we have the power within the UK to make our own legislation, ultimately we are legally obliged to adopt what's coming out of Europe. So Europe is far more kind of socially advanced in terms of their legislation and far more interested in workers' rights and human rights and things like that than the UK, which is traditionally, depending upon which government is in force of any particular time. So there's been a huge amount of legislation that came out of Europe. And this act effectively says that with effect from 31st of December, that's it. It's back to you know, UK rule. We're in complete control of the legislation that comes out. So the withdrawal agreement, for me, it was really just about making sure that we were back in control. We then needed to kind of add a bit more detail. So if you move on to the next slide. Yeah, we then came up with the European Union Withdrawal Agreement Act of 2020, got its royal assent 20th of January this year, just before the exit date on the 31st of January. And it's interesting, well, I say interesting, that's probably a fairly euphemistic and loose use of the word interesting. But in terms of what we promised to Europe for the transition period, in essence, everything that was in Europe would remain and we would still be bound by the terms of it in this transition period. And we made all these promises about what we would do after the transition period and when we were in control of our own legislation again. And it was made very clear that we would mirror what was in the European Union. We would make sure that we would protect workers' rights. We would not diminish the rights that they had. And that went through all the readings of the bill until the final bill stage. And then they removed the section that said that you know, we would safeguard workers' rights. And it's probably quite interesting to understand why that may have happened. In December 2019, there was a general election. And because Boris was able to get such a big majority, then he could be slightly more conservative with a big C in terms of how he dealt with the policies. And it's probably no surprise then he began to chip away at all these European rights that we've been effectively living with and used to and quite comfortable with now for a huge period of time. So the Withdrawal Agreement Act, you know, it allows us to make other legislation, and we expected to see that in this transition period, but nothing has happened. So we're still pretty much in the dark. So if you move on to the next slide then. Yeah, so the question now is, can we just ignore European law with effect from 1st of January 2021? It would be lovely if we could pick and choose the ones that we wanted to, but unfortunately not. And we still, in effect, have a snapshot of the position in the transition period that any piece of legislation that's based upon European law remains in force, and it will remain in force even beyond the transition period. We can and we will need to make different pieces of legislation if we want to change it. So, in effect, the status quo will remain. And I'm going to talk a bit later on about some of the key pieces of legislation that all of us are relatively familiar with now. You know, things like holiday pay and working time and data protection and things like that. The other thing is that the government were very keen to make sure that we moved back to kind of UK law as quickly as we could. And what they introduced in the Withdrawal Agreement Act was the ability for our courts not now having to follow what happened in Europe. And that's probably the biggest change that we've been able to agree with them. Because they were keen for the European Court of Justice or the Court of Justice of the European Union to maintain primacy or control. But what we stuck up for was the fact that, no, we need to make our own laws. So we can now interpret European laws purely with a UK angle on it. So we can't ignore anything. We're stuck with all these horrible decisions and horrible laws that we've got. So the next one I'm going to talk, next slide please, is about the protection of workers' rights. And I'd mentioned to you before that during the build stage of the Withdrawal Agreement Act, there was pledges made, there was commitments made to actually protecting it. But things change when you get such a big majority in the Commons. And back in July of 2018, there was a white paper produced, which was done by the UK government. And it was done with the aim of effectively trying to get the agreement of the European Union for us to leave. So we committed to certain things. One of them was a non-regression of employment law rights for workers. That was then carried forward into the next one. There was a policy paper that came out which talked of enhancing the workers' rights, enhancing the protection that workers get across the whole of the UK to at least match that. But as soon as the election results began to kind of filter through, then right at the last minute they tweaked it and they removed in their entirety the commitment that they wouldn't regress the workers' rights. So it'll be interesting to see where that actually goes. And I would love to be able to kind of give you an indication of the direction of travel. But on the basis that nothing has come out from the UK government, it's difficult for me to do anything other than kind of second guess where it's going to go. And that's probably the next slide, if possible, is talking about where we think the changes may well be. And I was looking through probably where the biggest areas of challenge be. One is discrimination law. And the fact is that the majority of our Equality Act is based upon various different directives and regulations that came out from the European Union. But all of us are relatively comfortable with, I think, where we as a country sit on discrimination. We've got our clearly defined protected characteristics. We know how to deal with certain, of those characteristics. So I'm not anticipating any real change there. Where I think there might be a change is, at present, for anyone going to an employment tribunal with a discrimination claim, the compensation is completely uncapped. And there's been a huge amount of lobbying done by some of the kind of larger representative groups of big business to try and get that compensation capped. So it may well be that that's where the change in discrimination comes from. There won't be any change to definitions of discrimination, indirect and direct, and harassment and victimisation. But I think there will be a tweaking of the potential compensation that you can get. The next one is the equality and human rights. And the fact is that we are a signatory to the European Convention on Human Rights. And a lot of people were asking, well, now that we are no longer part of the European Union, then where does that leave our obligations or commitment to this charter. The two are completely unconnected. We are signatories of the European Convention on Human Rights, and that was simply just a Europe-wide agreement that everyone signed up to adhere to these minimum terms. So there's no change going to happen there. The next one, which probably has been deeply unpopular, and Alistair and I had to, I suspect, field a number of calls a few years ago when it came to holiday pay. Holiday pay is from the Working Time Directive, and the Working Time Regulation is how we've interpreted that. So it's capped the number of working hours per week. It's introduced holiday pay, and the UK under a Labour government then bumped our obligation up to 5.6 weeks. So we've got these horrible cases in holiday pay and what gets taken into account, and in effect, anything and everything that you get as part of your employment is almost your holiday pay. So I think there might be some UK clarification on what is or isn't going to be included in the calculation for holiday pay. And equally, I think there might be a removal of the 48-hour working week limit. Bear in mind that we have a Conservative government, at least for just now, until Boris finally succumbs to the next vote of no confidence. But as we stand just now, we've got a Conservative government that's very pro-business. It is very keen to make sure that businesses are able to survive and thrive in the new European future. So they will want to try and remove any kind of restrictions to that. So holidays and working time, there might be a change there. And the last one I wanted to talk about is data protection. I mean, obviously, again, my entire life seems to be lurching from one crisis to the next, from holiday pay to GDPR to Brexit to then coronavirus, and what the hell does furlough mean? But in terms of data protection, the fact is that we, as a nation, are so heavily reliant upon exchange of data with Europe, and without kind of being too technical in a snapshot, when we were part of the European Union, then GDPR applied to us. We then adopted the Data Protection Act of 2018, which mirrored exactly what's in GDPR. And the reason we did that is that when we leave on the 1st of January, we are obviously then a non-EU member state. And for EU member states to then supply data to us, or for them to process data we're sending them, they need what's called effectively an adequacy ruling. So, in other words, the European Union needs to be satisfied that the UK is prepared to adhere to and comply with the terms of GDPR. So that's why there will be zero change on data protection. So in terms of the net impact on you and your businesses, I don't think you're going to notice anything significant. There is likely to be some new legislation coming. So we've been promised a new Employment Act. The last one was in 1996, and you know, it's things have completely changed since then. So there's likely to be a new Employment Act, but beyond that, everything I suspect will remain in place. And where you might face your bigger challenges will come with what Alistair is going to talk about, which is the freedom of movement and the new immigration rules. So if we move on to my final slide. Yeah, what do you need to do? In short, not a huge amount. Keep in touch with the Chamber, and obviously they can circulate any other bits of update or guidance or advice or regulations that we're going to get. But what Alistair and I have done is sit down and kind of prepare, in effect, an action plan. And it is more related around those businesses within the Chamber that do rely upon EU national workers or employees coming over. So we've given you an action plan, which is just so that you can, I mean, I don't know if anyone's similar to me, but I like having a plan and just kind of working through it. So for all those control freak OCDers out there, then you can work through your action plan. For the rest of you, you can just file it away, you know, and if there is another Russian toilet roll, then by all means you can find a use for it at that stage. So I'm going to be hanging about, and I think the plan is I move on to Alistair now, and then at the end, if anyone's got any questions, then by all means feel free to ask us. So I'll pass you over to Alistair now. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that, Graham. That was a really good insight actually into some of the legal situation that we're all facing. So thanks for taking the time to share that. As Graham said, everyone, we're obviously keen to try and get you off in time before the bake-off starts. And as Graham said as well, it is quite refreshing to be discussing a different subject. And Graham touched on coronavirus, but for myself, I feel all I've kind of done the last few months is talk about furlough and redundancy. So it's quite refreshing to do a different type of webinar, albeit Brexit does seem to be creeping up on us very, very fast. So what I want to do is probably just spend 15-20 minutes or so just to kind of discuss some of the key elements of Brexit around your kind of workforce and some of the kind of plans and things that you need to put into practice and into place kind of by year end. So the key things I'm going to touch on this evening is talking about the end of free movement and what that kind of means around the current position, the EU settlement scheme, right to work checks we'll have to kind of do in the future, and then just a kind of short overview in terms of what's changing for UK nationals. If you can skip to the next slide, please, Sarah. So what might be quite helpful actually is just out of interest, I think probably everyone who's on the call tonight, I'm assuming that you do currently employ EU nationals. So as Graham kind of said earlier as well, we're going to be around for questions. So just to kind of keep the webinar kind of flowing, if you do have any kind of specific questions, pop that into the chat box. But I've kind of just got a short question I'm just going to ask in the chat, and it's really just for you guys to kind of let us know if you do currently employ EU nationals, and also if you anticipate employing anyone from outside the UK from January 2021 onwards. And that just has to be a kind of yes, no, and that will kind of help Graham and I towards the end of the call. So I've just put that up in the chat now. So just in terms of the kind of current position, so as you know, currently anyone from the EU can come to the UK to work. They can come to the UK to study, and if they do that, they don't require a visa, and there's no kind of minimum skill level required to kind of do that. And in actual fact, quite often people can come and live in the UK without a job already being lined up. What's going to happen moving forward is obviously that is going to change, and we're now in a situation where there is a time limit around the transition arrangements. And kind of Graham's touched on, I think at the beginning of the year, we all kind of thought, yeah, plenty of time, Brexit, that's months away, plenty of time to get this sorted out. And then lo and behold, COVID hit us. We had a kind of lockdown, and the last few months has all just been focused on that. I think I've certainly seen in the last week or so, and possibly driven by the US election, there's certainly more chat on the news around kind of Brexit. So it is definitely on the horizon and coming around very, very quickly. So for kind of non-EU nationals, what we're going to have, what we have at the moment for non-EU nationals, this is the current position. So that's anyone who's employing anyone from outside the EU. So you may already be doing this, is where you would have to kind of be classed as a licensed sponsor. So you would have to kind of demonstrate anyone from outside the EU, you know, you would have to kind of complete the process around the kind of skill shortage, looking at you know, why there's a difficulty in recruiting that kind of particular role for your organisation. It's quite a time-consuming process, and it normally kind of applies to kind of highly skilled roles which are difficult to fill within the UK or the EU. So where I've kind of been involved in these types of things before from an HR perspective is more around very specific IT roles that have been quite difficult to recruit. So it can be quite a time-consuming process for employers to go through, but the key thing to remember is anyone doing that just now has to be a kind of licensed sponsor. And currently as well, at the moment you can work within the UK if you have a family member who is a British citizen, or there's also a little bit of a kind of legacy from the Commonwealth, where if you've got ancestry from the Commonwealth, that could give you the right to work in the UK. So we're not going to cover any of that tonight. We're just going to focus on the key elements around Brexit. So if we can move on to the next slide, please, Sarah. So the EU settlement, so this is where EU workers can continue to exercise their right to free movement, and they've got up until 11 o'clock on the 31st of December. So whilst we probably won't be having any Hogmanay parties as such this year like we have done in previous years, there is still plenty of time for people to apply for that kind of settlement scheme. And to be eligible, people can apply for either pre-settled status, and they have until the 30th of June 2021 to apply for that. So there is a kind of application deadline for people who are in the UK at the moment. So they've got an option for pre-settled and settled status, which we'll cover on the next slide. Can you click onto that one for me, please, Sarah? Oh, sorry, go back one, sorry. Yep, so just to kind of emphasise around the rules around the settled status. So what that kind of means is anybody who's been living and working in the UK for 5 years can apply for settled status, which means that they can have they have permanent residence in the UK. So that's a kind of good sign for people, and that is only lost if they have an absence from the UK exceeding that kind of 5 years. For those that have been here less than 5 years, they can apply for pre-settled status, and that gives them the opportunity to live and work here for up to a 5-year period, and at which point after that 5 years they can then apply for settled status. So the big change is that EU nationals will no longer have the automatic right to come to the UK to work or study, and any right to remain and work here will be governed by a points-based sponsorship system. So pretty similar to what I mentioned earlier around anyone who's out with the EU at the moment. So that's the kind of the big change. And I guess from an HR perspective, what would be quite helpful for you to be looking at with your teams is identifying people who kind of fall into that category, and just to make sure that they're actually going through that process to apply for settled or pre-settled status, and make sure that application's done in time. So you have got some time to do that, and really just from an HR perspective, just identifying who these people are in your existing workforce and making plans to make sure you've got that in place so you don't incur any kind of penalty longer term. Next slide, please, Sarah. So kind of have a wee look into the kind of right to work checks that you have to kind of go through. And whilst there is an electronic system in place, from the kind of research that I've kind of looked at, and Graham might be able to answer this as well, my understanding is that whilst that is that the plan is to have a good electronic system in place, there will also be a physical document for EU workers, and it won't all be digital. However, what they are trying to do at the moment, just with COVID and some restrictions being in place, anyone who is applying can actually send documents electronically and have these kind of scanned. So it means that they don't necessarily have to visit a UK's border agency office. So that's a kind of big change. So I think a lot of us have kind of seen digital transformation take place far quicker this year than what we maybe have anticipated. And certainly the government and the UK Borders Agency have kind of moved with that process as well, which does make it a little bit easier for your staff to kind of go through that process. Other thing just to consider there is, as an employer, you need to kind of be able to check these online. So there's a link in the slide deck as well, which you'll get a copy of, and that just allows you for moving forward that you can kind of do these checks online. And the plan seems to be that they want to kind of make that far easier for employers. So there will be an electronic system in place, which just makes it easier for you to comply as an employer. Next slide, please, Sarah. And a kind of final point, really, which kind of mainly applies where it's probably kind of more multinational organisations where you have got people kind of working in the EU. So obviously one of the kind of key things around Brexit is that the changes aren't just kind of one way. It does kind of impact on UK nationals as well. So that kind of means for any of us and any of your team potentially who, you know, maybe looking to work in an EU country, they could potentially be faced with up to 27 different immigration regimes, depending on how that kind of works. So that's, you know, something just to kind of be aware of. There's going to be slightly different rules for Ireland. So what's kind of happened there with the kind of UK government have agreed a kind of different arrangement with Ireland. So kind of fairly similar to what I have in place at the moment. But obviously if it's going to be outside Ireland and another kind of EU country, then there is going to be different rules in place. So things are going to look very, very different for UK nationals working abroad, you know, come next year as well. One of the big things that's going to be quite a challenge is just the recognition of qualifications, and there's going to be a process that people have to go through just to kind of make sure that qualification is kind of recognised in that specific EU country. So at the moment, the arrangements that are in place, that's going to be a kind of big thing that is going to change moving forward. So it will therefore become much harder for British citizens to work in the EU moving forward. So it's certainly something that you kind of need to think about as well, just in terms of how your businesses are set up if they are set up to work in the EU at the moment. So that's a kind of very, very brief overview, just in terms of some of the steps that you might have to be doing to kind of manage from an HR perspective. And obviously quite good practice to try and assist your employees if you can with the kind of settled status. So, you know, that's probably quite a big worry for employees at the moment, quite uncertain times, just with everything else that's kind of going on. So taking a kind of real proactive approach and doing that is definitely demonstrating that you're kind of doing the right thing. So hand back to Sarah. That's kind of all I wanted to cover just on the current position and what you kind of need to look at moving forward for EU workers. Graham and I will be around to answer any questions that you might have, so feel free to kind of pop them in the chat box, or if you want to open up the discussion, we're both available to answer any questions on that.
Thanks very much, gents. Sorry, I ended up losing control of everything when I was sharing my screen there. It doesn't often happen, but it has happened the last couple of times. I think Microsoft are making some changes, which they're not always updating everybody on. Thanks very much, gents. There's obviously quite a bit of information there for people to digest. I think coronavirus has, certainly put Brexit on the back burners for quite a lot of people, but it is happening, and people do need to be aware of these changes. Obviously, what's coming into force, whether it's that they currently employ EU nationals and need to support them with some of the applications, or they're going to be looking to recruit, and the talent might not be in the UK for what they're needing. So yeah, there's certainly a lot of things to be considered. I've got a copy of the action plan. What was it you called it, Graham?
Yep, an action plan. Yeah.
Action plan. Yeah, perfect.
It sounded quite dynamic. That was why.
I think they're handy to have for people just to refer back to as well. Whether it's this week, next week, or the next week. So yeah, no, that's certainly good. So yeah, we have a question in from Mary. Mary, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself. You come in and ask your question. If not, then I can ask for you. No, I know Mary's had problems in the past, unable to mute. Yeah. So Mary was asking, does the employer have liability if a non-UK citizen does not have settled status in 2021?
Yep. Yeah, there would be some liability on that. So not too dissimilar to what happens at the moment. If you're probably kind of recruiting staff just now, you would be looking to capture some ID documentation at the probably the recruitment process, or certainly at the induction process. and that's something that can be audited through the UK Border Agency anyway. So these checks would still have to be in place, but yet you would have to have that, or you would be subject to a kind of hefty penalty for employing someone who technically shouldn't be employed in the UK.
Yeah. Yeah, it's. I mean, fundamentally, they're an illegal worker, and you as the employer are meant to be the adult in the relationship. So you're meant to be the one that's got all the documentation. Your second point, Mary, then about some EU nationals feeling unsettled and not welcome. I have to say that's been mirrored by a huge number of kind of different people. That there was a real kind of sense of xenophobia about the whole kind of Brexit, and it was kind of reclaiming our borders, and so many more Union Jacks going up, that I don't mind feeling proud and patriotic of where you come from, but when it stretches into discrimination. So I think part of what we've covered in the action plan is to try and kind of figure out how you can be an employer of choice. And for me, I think it is about making sure that your business is very clear in terms of the values that you have. And diversity is massively important for me to every workforce. So you need to try and do your best to make these EU nationals feel as welcome as they can. But it's really difficult if they do that, but then when they go around Tesco, they get, someone, just giving them some abuse there. So I guess there's nothing really kind of legally you can do. EU nationals that have settled status will have the same rights that UK nationals have in terms of the Equality Act. So they've got rights that they can pursue there against their employer, against third parties. But yeah, it's really difficult. I don't know if you've got any other suggestions, Alice, on how you would actually just make your employees feel wanted.
Yeah, no, I think spot on what you've said, Graham. I think the other kind of couple of points on that, just around your values, is a lot of it kind of starts with communication. So just making sure line managers are properly trained on diversity. So that covers all aspects of the Equality Act. But I think just highlighting this moving forward, and so making sure managers are equipped and know that the kind of rules around it, and yeah, just making sure that people are feeling supported. So that might just be keeping a regular check-in on your kind of non-UK citizens to make sure they're okay, what support do they need, and if people are, kind of feeling treated unfairly, then try and be proactive around how you kind of manage that. Obviously, if you've got people in the workplace who are doing that, then that's not the type of people you probably want in your workplace anyway. So let's be proactive and deal with it. And obviously, if it's stuff outside the workplace, that's stuff you can't really influence. But let's do our best to make sure you're kind of looking after these colleagues in the business, so they do feel wanted and want they kind of do the right thing by you as well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the things you can do, I guess, Mary, is what Sharon has done at Cantal there, which is you support your employees to complete the application process for settled status, because there's two important things about it. Number one is it's not that complicated, and number two is it's free. So, two fairly important considerations there. So again, you can assist them to complete the process, and maybe that will make them feel a bit more kind of sort of wanted.
Yeah. And it allows you to retain that talent in the business as well, because they feel that you've really looked after them, so they're not wanting to kind of move on and go and join anyone else.
Yeah.
Gents, the process, you said the process for settled status is quite easy. What's the kind of time frame for that? If an employer's got a lot of employees that they need to support, is it quite a quick, done within a week? Is it a 4-week process? What sort of time frame do you know?
They had a glut. I mean, I think they put a bit of a push on it. I mean, it is a civil service operation, therefore there is a limited budget in terms of who can actually do it. So I think in terms of what the current wait time is, I don't know. I do think, again, it seems to come in waves, that there's a bit of publicity, or Brexit suddenly becomes part of the national conversation again, and then there's a surge of people wanting to apply. But Alistair picked up it's June next year is the absolute final cut-off date to get the applications in. So again, I'd be interested to find out, those members that have been supporting their staff to do it. For me, it goes back to your fundamentals about just communicate, just tell them what they need to do, and try and set aside time to do that. And again, just picking up what Caroline's point about kind of the xenophobia, I completely agree. Having a robust immigration policy does not make you racist. But what I felt was it was the kind of the upsurge of it moved beyond just kind of national pride to something a bit more, kind of sinister than that. So I completely agree. I'm not saying that we should just not have any kind of immigration controls at all. So it's just it was the way that was kind of shown itself, and the emergence of some fairly horrible right-wing groups that kind of use this as an opportunity. So apologies if I've offended you there, Caroline.
Sharon's come on to say that her employees have really appreciated the support through the unsettling time. She's found that they've been more productive and engaged as a result. So that's certainly a positive for supporting.
I think just back on the point around the time, so I've not got any recent experience, so it's difficult to comment on how quickly the process takes, but we did have a couple of businesses we're working with early in the new year, and it wasn't a long process. So I think it will depend on the resources that I guess UK Border Agency have. But I think, as Graham touched on as well, it's probably just a little bit around a bit of due diligence in the workplace. If you've got employees maybe driving a forklift truck or first aid certificates that are due to expire next year, you kind of look at that and plan that in. Just do the same. I've got some time around that with the EU workers, so just have that as a kind of priority between now and the next few weeks, and just start kind of mapping out that process. The action plan will definitely help with some of that, but yeah, just kind of being proactive and making sure that you've covered that with all your existing staff.
Donna, do you want to come in with a question?
Yeah, I was just out of curiosity, what is going to happen with seasonal workers that are not going to be here over long-term periods and they want to drift in and out? Is there going to be a specific thing for them?
Yeah, so that's going to be a bit of a challenge, because a lot of it will be dependent on how much time they've spent in the UK. So obviously they don't need to be here consecutively. That there is an allowance that they can be in and out the country. But yeah, that will be a kind of challenge depending on how much time they spend out of the UK. So that's and we've got a couple of kind of farming clients that we look after, and they've already seen it. This kind of season, a lot of people didn't return, decided not to come back, so they're struggling to attract talent to work in some of the roles that they have. So yeah, we'll just have to have a look at that. Probably better to look at that on a case-by-case basis, looking at how often people leave and when they're here.
Yeah, I think being blunt about it, there is still a real pressing need for EU and other foreign nationals working here, and there's certain sectors that massively rely on that. Okay, farming is one, and fruit picking. Vets and medical and construction as well. So it's not something we can ignore and hope there's enough talent based in the UK. And equally, Alice's point about this is a two-way street, and we don't have the same freedom movement now to go around Europe and ply our trade there. There are too many people either side, moving backwards and forwards, that they will need to find some kind of agreement in place. But as it stands, that's the problem with COVID, is that we've not had the opportunity to have those discussions. And to me, all the trade deals seem fairly rushed, fairly last minute, and it just seems to me like an almighty big game of poker that everyone's trying to kind of bluff each other and see who's going to cave in first, which is not really the way to deal with it. But that's what we're stuck with. So part of that trade deal will be freedom of movement of workers to some degree. So seasonal, sessional, temporary, whatever, I think there still will be an opportunity to use that in future. But as we sit here today, then Alistair's right. Settled status or illegal worker, that's or obviously your visa applications.
Thank you, Donna. There's no more questions in the chat. I don't know if anybody has any other questions. If you do, then please feel free to unmute yourself and jump in, or pop your hand up, or stick a question in the chat if you're not able to unmute yourself. One thing while people are thinking about questions, if there's an employer out there who hasn't done anything, isn't prepared, and isn't actually aware of all the changes, where's the best place to point them in the direction of what's the best thing to do, as kind of first steps for an employer who's not prepared?
Yeah, the DirectGov website, Sarah's got a lot of good information. So I've kind of got a link to some of that on the slide deck that I had. So that's a really good starting point. And it certainly gives employers a good indication in terms of what they need to do. It's a free resource as well, so it's worth people having a look at that. And then obviously if they're members of any trade associations, obviously members of the chamber would be a good help. It's just trying to kind of raise the profile there. But yeah, the DirectGov website, I would say, is a good starting point for businesses.
Mary's asking what arrangements will be in place to assess qualifications against UK standards.
It's something that has yet to be agreed, because I know we were looking at that ourselves in terms of a law degree, and it's interesting because we don't have that. Just now we're members of an agreement, and effectively it's recognised Europe-wide. When we leave, we don't have that recognition, but equally they don't recognise our qualifications. So that's something else that needs to be determined. Because I think you're right, Mary's point there about if you don't recognise somebody's degree from another country or qualification, then is that not discrimination? And the answer is it could be. It could be. I mean, I don't want to get all lawyerly, but sometimes I can't help myself that it depends what the reason for the different treatment is. If the reason for the different treatment is the fact that they don't have a UK recognised qualification, then I don't think that's discrimination. It might be a claim against the UK government that by failing to put in place these provisions, then the UK government is acting in a discriminatory way. So that might be a more interesting case that you could bring there. So we don't have anything yet agreed as to what's going to happen next year, but we do have an existing recognition agreement in place for qualifications, and that applies to EU and non-EU nationals as well. It's always quite exciting when you see these wee kind of moving dots.
I know, I was just going to say there's people are typing.
Yeah, I'm going to give away kind of like my age, but it used to be when you were watching the football results and the video printer, kind of flashing it along here. Bolton Wanderers 2.
So, gents, are you seeing a rise in people preparing for Brexit, or is it still very much a coronavirus?
Yeah, for me, it's still very much coronavirus. There's very few businesses I've kind of spoken to us about Brexit recently. So, as I said, it was a big focus at the start of the year, but it just definitely seems to have fallen off the radar. And even we do a kind of regular kind of client newsletter, and we've put a kind of couple of articles in recently around Brexit, and nobody's kind of got back in touch looking for more information around it. It definitely seems to be something that people have just put to the back of their mind. I don't know about you, Graham. Have you seen anything different?
Yeah, exactly the same. I suspect that the announcement yesterday about the vaccine will have come as a kind of it's a blessed relief potentially for us all. But it's probably then made us realise that there is life after COVID, and now people are beginning to think, oh my God, and they're seeing the adverts on TV now about getting ready for the new dawn. So I'm expecting there will be a bit more interest now over the coming weeks, but who knows? I don't know. It's my own personal view, but I just get the impression that it's crept up on us and it's kind of jumped out at the last minute. So for some clients we've got who rely heavily on EU nationals, they've probably already put in place there. We saw Sharon mentioning that she's got involved in the application process for her employees, and that's paid dividends just because of the loyalty and productivity you get. So those companies that rely heavily on it will probably have started some process before now, and it's just a case of dusting off what you've done before.
Yeah, the last 8 months have just disappeared. Quite frankly, who would have thought that when we all went home in March that within the blink of an eye would be around at Christmas time and still going through the pandemic. Linda's asking, if you don't hold a sponsorship license, is it best to state within the job advert you're unable to recruit?
What type of role is that for, Linda? So is that just if you're advertising a position at the moment? So I guess at the moment, if people aren't eligible to work in the UK, then you're within your after January, right? Okay.
Well, it's all about really you looking at your business and deciding whether you do need that. If you don't have the local skills and you don't think you'll be able to recruit them, and you think that's going to have a negative impact on your business, then maybe it's worthwhile looking at becoming a sponsor. Because again, it sounds a really onerous task, and I don't know if anyone in the discussion actually does have that sponsorship and is able to kind of sponsor people coming through. But immigration is probably a bigger topic than we can talk about tonight. So if you think your business needs it, then have a look at becoming a sponsor and seeing whether or not there is the kind of the domestic job market there, and if not, then maybe you can go further afield to get the right talent into the business. But in answer to your question, then I think you would need to say that. I mean, by all means, if they're able to come in, and that's why we're saying, if they can come in by 11 p.m. on Hogmanay A, then that's what Alistair is saying, you can apply for pre-settled status. So either what you need to be doing now is requisitioning as many kind of buses as you can and just kind of touring around Europe at a social distance, and then try and kind of get the talent in before now. But you're right, if you're recruiting after January and you need EU nationals to come over, then you would need to do it through some kind of sponsorship agreement.
Okay, I hope that helps, Linda. 3 wee dots are going again. Yeah, just Linda saying thanks. Okay, I'm conscious of time. There's also been quite a good, kind of discussion going. If anybody wants to keep up the discussion, then kind of happy to connect people with Alistair and Graham. The recording will be up on YouTube in the next 24 to 48 hours, so please feel free to jump on YouTube and catch up with the recording as well, and share it with colleagues and other professionals within your sector as well, to catch up on the recording. So that's all for us just now. Thanks very much for joining us, and massive thank you to Alistair and Graham for joining us and also sharing their expertise with us as well. I will get the survey off to everybody tomorrow. It will include the action plan, and like I say, if anybody does want to connect further, then just feel free to do it through us. Okay, so good night everybody. Go and grab your tea and settle down for Bake Off. We'll see what week it is this week. See you later. Thanks guys, bye.
Bye.